If you're not signed up for the Morning Jolt from Jim Geraghty, you should. NationalReview.com. He also writes for the magazine, of course, for The Corner. Has had a couple of books out. He was on with us a few months ago to talk, and previous to that, The Weed Agency, which is almost too scary to be true, or no, too true to be scary. I don't know which one that is. New book out right now, Heavy Lifting. Grow up, get a job, start a family, and other manly advice. Cam Edwards and our guest, Jim Geraghty from National Review. Jim, good morning to you.
Scott, thanks very much for having me on. It's great to be here.
Appreciate the time. It's a book that hits me in a pretty sweet spot. I'm 35, been married for 3.5 years. I have a 2.5-year-old and an 11-month-old at home. So I'm going through the process.
Well, first of all, congratulations to you on all of those fronts. And as you say, I'm sure, we got the 11-month-old. I'm guessing the last couple of years of your life, you've had perhaps an irregular sleep pattern. You probably feel like the guy who used to be on the variety shows with a whole lot of spinning plates and you had to run around and keep all of them spinning and keep any of them from crashing to the ground. But you're still here, and given it, I'm going to go out on a limb, Scott, and suggest that at this moment you wouldn't trade anything in your life. You wish you had more hours in the day, but there's nothing in your life you want to give up. Right?
I do always tell people, if I just had 2 more days of the week and 4 more hours in each day, I would be set. I mean, really, there would be no problems.
And so, people, it's a stress, but I think it's a fulfilling stress, I would argue. Cam and I kind of discussed the idea for this book. We were discussing the kind of the phenomenon of young men and sometimes not so young men who have this phenomenon they call failure to launch. They kind of live in this extended adolescence. Sometimes they move back in with their parents after college or don't leave after high school. Don't really get that first important job. That career path is clear. Because of that, have a hard time finding some nice young lady to settle down with. Don't get married. Don't have kids, and all of these kind of rites of passage that were once considered almost just an expectation of what a man was supposed to do, getting pushed off further and further into the future. And we kind of observed that, for all of the stress that a working dad and a married guy goes through in life, it's better than being the 40-something guy hitting on 20-something girls at the bar. At some point, you become a little pathetic that way.
Yeah, I went to college. I had three roommates, so there were 4 of us in the quad in the room, and I am the only one of the 4 with kids. Only 2 of us are married. One of them just got done with school. I mean, just kept going for additional degrees and masters and this and that and the other thing. And I look at them from afar a bit, and they're living in like some sort of suspension of this college life. And I don't mean that by the partying and the staying up real late, but I don't even know how to say it without insulting them. But they don't really want the additional responsibilities that come with getting older. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm sure. Hopefully, they've considered themselves happy with their lives, and they're not racking up endless amounts of debt as they get more and more degrees. At some point, one, you do have to kind of jump into that real world and hopefully do something. And secondly, for some guys who don't get a whole bunch of letters after their name, they do live in sort of this extended adolescence, and that's no way to go through life, son. At some point. And again, I think what came out of this as a discussion is the sense that some men kind of put this off or fear it or avoid it out of a sense that it's going to make them feel tied down, that it's going to make them feel repressed or bound or we have a whole bunch of kind of cultural signifiers that are hopefully usually said tongue-in-cheek, referring to our wives as the old ball and chain, or
right.
My kids are brats and all that stuff. And these things, have always kind of been, comedy staples. The sitcom of, we all picture kind of Al Bundy sitting on the couch. On the one hand, guys can joke about this, but I hope young men would never take from that, no, you actually don't want to have this life. And I kind of got this feeling that, Cam and I were like, somebody's got to talk about the upside of growing up and getting a real job and marriage and fatherhood and all these things that were once kind of expected, and to say, hey, it's not just that some authority figure on high is wagging their finger at you saying you have to do this. These are good things
right.
that make life make you happier and healthier. And there are tons of benefits and advantages to guys to do this. And we kind of felt like there was this giant cultural lie that needed to be kind of dispelled here.
Heavy lifting, the book, Grow Up, Get a Job, Start a Family, Other Manly Advice. Jim Geraghty, our guest. Cam Edwards is co-author. It's available now everywhere, including Amazon.com. This is Riley and Scott on WROK. Let's get to the marriage portion. The event itself, there's a chapter on getting married, and you say, guys, forget about it. You have no input. It's really the wife's show. But I must tell you, I am so glad that someone has finally taken on the completely inane tradition of the garter belt toss. I got one major, well, that's not true. I kind of got my way on the first dance song. If my wife didn't hear me say that, she would have killed me when I got home. But the other thing I said was, we're not doing the garter belt toss. We're not doing it. I was so uncomfortable.
Good for you, Scott.
You have your head in a place where no one should be watching as you have your head there, and then take this thing that's been on your wife's upper thigh and toss it to family members. It made no sense to me.
In any other sense, that would be considered, perverse and inappropriate, and what the hell is wrong with you? And if you don't believe me, try it at Thanksgiving this year, okay? Anytime like that. And yet, for some, my wife and I were among the first in our crowd to get married. We were about 25, 26. And we were kind of the crash test dummies. We didn't realize you could turn down traditions and stuff like that. So there are a few things we did that we look back and we realized, if we were doing it again, we wouldn't have done that. As I mentioned in the book, this just strikes me as like this quasi burlesque. It's a European tradition, which explains a little bit.
Sure.
But the idea that you're going to do something that's a little bit sexual, a little bit suggestive, in front of Aunt Edna and Uncle Leo and your grandmother and all these other people, and it just is bizarre. And I've mentioned in the book, I went to one wedding where it turned out extraordinarily awkward because one of my friends ended up catching the garter, and then when they threw the bouquet, a 12-year-old girl who didn't really know what was going on ran out and caught it herself. And thankfully, they skipped the remainder part of that. Kevin, I also criticize, look, as much as we're encouraging guys to get married, we need to do something about the wedding industrial complex in this country. It really has turned into this like women are almost encouraged to become bridezillas. And if there's anything I could, blow up, it would be this phrase, it's the happiest day of your life. Because if that's the case, it's all downhill from there. I can't imagine a worse note to start when you realize, the wedding was the best part and everything's getting worse from here.
Well, speaking of what comes next, you have a great paragraph that you wrote. The parts of the book that are written by you say Jim. The parts that are written by Cam say Cam. It's nice the way that works. Marriage is actually easier if you and your loved one have a yin and yang dynamic, different strengths, different preferences. Your spouse isn't supposed to be a clone of you. Offsetting strengths, weaknesses, perspective, ideas. I couldn't agree with that more. My wife and I are similar on a lot of the core values, the way we look at life and approach life, but on a lot of the nitty-gritty details, we're quite different. She's extremely outgoing. She makes friends so quickly. I'm more the introvert that kind of stays in the background, despite the fact I work, in radio. One of our biggest disagreements come because I'm a very visual guy. I leave stuff out. Like if I know I need the sugar in a couple of hours and I just used it, I'll just leave it on the counter. It drives her completely bonkers. That's the small stuff we have different perspectives on, but it doesn't make or break the way our marriage works.
Yeah. One of the chapters, we have a section on what it's like when you start living with your loved one, and kind of that's a big transition, whether you do it before marriage or right at the moment of marriage. And all the little things like, where do you put stuff in the kitchen? And I kind of put an important footnote there that where you decide to put stuff in the kitchen really doesn't matter because whenever your parents or in-laws visit, they're going to put it back where they think it's
Yes, they will.
All of a sudden, like, where's the can opener? Where's the bottle opener? The spatula? Everything ends up, it's as if little gremlins have come around your house and rearranged things after they visit. No, you're absolutely right. That if the purpose of life is to find someone who is just like you and spend the rest of your life with them, we'd all be gay. There's kind of this inherent differences in when a man and a woman get together like that. And so I think, people, the old book, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. If you think that men and women look at the world somewhat differently, a bit of a broad generalization, but I think generally true, like that's good because it gives you that other perspective. And if one approach to a problem doesn't work, you can try the other person's approach. And ideally, that makes it a little bit easier for you to go through life than to stumble through on your own.
Jim Geraghty is with us. NationalReview.com for his writings on a daily basis. The book, though, is out now with him and Cam Edwards co-writing Heavy Lifting, Grow Up, Get a Job, Start a Family, Other Manly Advice, Amazon.com and elsewhere. All right, so fatherhood, part 4 in the book. You have a couple of kids. I have a couple of kids now. I knew I was growing up when you mentioned some Mitt Romney advice too, career advice. I think a Mitt Romney on family advice. It was amazing that bio piece during the Republican National Convention in 2012 that ran pre-prime time, so Clint Eastwood could give his speech. I watched that bio piece, and I was so moved by this guy who, forget about the wealth and the success, he looked at the way his family loved him, the way he adored his grandchildren, the way his community loved him, the way he helped and led his church, the way he the way he was able to connect with even younger people. And I looked at it, that's the life I want to lead, right? You know, certainly the money and stuff is a different part of him, but just the personal side of Mitt Romney, if you can't look at that, and that's one of the horrible things about him being so demonized by Democrats back in 2012. If you can't look at the personal side of Mitt Romney, the charitable side, the family side, and not say you want to emulate that, something's very wrong with you.
It's funny, Scott, you're the second person in one of these interviews who's brought that up, or the documentary that came out after the election showing, him just kind of goofing around with his family. And we both had that perspective, like, wait, I wish that guy had run for president.
Yeah.
Instead of the stiff guy who kept going on about tax rates. That there was something very personable about it. It was very private. He definitely didn't show it off very often. But you saw the way him, goofing around with his kids, with his sons when they were smaller. There was something really great in emulating. You kind of wish people could emulate about that. There was a very interesting turn in this culture that Mitt Romney was considered weird. Right? There was something strange or off or bad about him because he seemed so white bread. One of the recurring themes of the book, and this is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but this idea of what would Ward Cleaver do? And for listeners who don't remember, Ward Cleaver was the dad on Leave It to Beaver.
Yes.
He's this kind of your quintessential, iconic 1950s sitcom dad. There was a time when that was the baseline. That was what was normal, and I don't know what normal would be now. For a while, I used to use Cliff Huxtable, but for obvious reasons, I don't refer to Bill Cosby anymore.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get the idea of, Cam and I, as we were beginning this book, we started talking about, who are the father figures who are seen as heroic in today's culture. And we had a hard time finding some. We came up with Jack Bauer.
Yeah.
Although he's not necessarily going to be Father of the Year award, he's constantly on the run or having to go and torture somebody or something like that. There's Mr. Incredible from The Incredibles. But for some reason, our culture has this kind of dichotomy split that we don't like to have our heroes being fathers, and we don't like our fathers tend to be either old and crotchety obstacles for our heroes. And I just kind of want to say, no, Dad, most men in the military, the fire departments, police, the guys wearing a badge who are risking their lives every day, a lot of them are fathers, right? And so why we have come to this conclusion that fathers aren't meant to be seen in this heroic light? And, I think I find a lot of dads out there who'd agree with me.
Yeah, Jim Geraghty with us. The new book is out now, Heavy Lifting. I kind of get the feeling dads are fighting back a bit. Riley, my co-host who's out there this morning, has this, he calls it TV dad syndrome or commercial dad syndrome, where the dad is always the stupidest guy in the room and does the most foolish thing, and we all have to laugh at him. But I kind of get the feeling that's changing a bit. Yeah, that cool Cheerios commercial from a bit ago, which originally aired in Canada and made its way down to the U.S. eventually, How to Dad. That got a lot of good reaction. And I get the feeling dads are fighting back a little bit. Yeah,
and I think to the extent this book has a rallying cry, I do kind of want to change the way society looks at dads and sees as dads. Look, the bumbling dad on sitcoms has been a staple for years, and it's not like any individual case is tearing down the image of fatherhood in society. It's more of this collective sense. And what's kind of interesting, I observed, it's not like we need a million dad march. I think part of the deal is most of the dads are busy, right? We don't have time for whining about what's on television. We got stuff to do. But you find your real role models off the screen. And it kind of has become, you also kind of wonder if this is a reflection of the fact that if you made if you make a woman character look bumbling and hopeless and hapless, women's group will be up in arms. Heaven forbid you do something with the minority group. In a way, dads are kind of the last safe targets for comedy. And so you could say, yeah, in a way, this book is kind of pushing back against this tide of either political correctness or kind of this just standing up for people who are kind of in some, the last people who are acceptable to be mocked and ridiculed and seen as silly, when in fact these are the kind of guys who make the world go round.
Jim Geraghty, National Review, the new book, Heavy Lifting, Grow Up, Get a Job, Start a Family, Other Manly Advice. One political question, and it's a big one. Don't, I know you might not get into
you do a book tour like this and you have the job I do, you know questions like that are coming. Ask away, Scott, anytime you like.
Okay, so look, this is a big question, and I don't know if you'll have the answer. But where does this schism between conservatives, who are more than happy to support a political liberal in Donald Trump because he's loud and he fights and he's entertaining, and the conservatives who perhaps are looking at his record and say, how can you support a guy who wants to overturn Citizens United, and is a guy that supports eminent domain, and is a guy that has taken all these liberal positions in the past? You would have excoriated a guy like John McCain. You said McCain was too liberal, Romney's too liberal, Trump's okay. How do we get back together? How do we get back together before November of 2016?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And in fact, we were having this conversation with somebody the other day, and they said we should be playing the Taylor Swift song, "We Are Never, Ever, Ever Getting Back Together." Because, or to use another one, there's some bad blood between these two groups.
Yes.
That there really is kind of this sense of, hey, wait a minute, if you're willing to completely hand wave away the concept of property rights because you really like this guy, and I think in some cases the kind of insults, style and kind of this insufferably arrogant attitude that Trump carries with himself. And on the flip side, these people saying, hey, wait a minute, no, this is the guy who speaks very plainly about the illegal immigration problem. And I guess that's what drives it, is whether or not you think America is in trouble or whether you think America is in crisis. And I think a lot of the people who are backing Trump, we're in crisis. And look, I think you and I could probably talk for hours about what's wrong in this country and what's gotten worse in the past 7 years. And to be honest, maybe it was getting worse in the second half of the Bush years, economically, culturally, socially, and the world is on fire, as our defense secretary said a couple of years ago. Ultimately, Trump, if nothing else, comes across as a guy who wants to jump in head first and tackle this. Now, as I put it to another radio host who's an enthusiastic backer of Trump, if I felt Trump could do what his fans think he can do, I'd be a bigger supporter. I just think this guy has no idea how government works, no idea how Washington works. He's a total amateur at all this, and he's going to get into Washington and end up yelling at people, and the bureaucracy will win. The entire, you mentioned the weed agency, we're kind enough to mention that. The weed agency is all about how the bureaucracy overcomes reformers who have they figure out ways to exploit their flaws. And I just don't see Donald Trump as the guy who can go there and actually, get government agencies to do what they're supposed to do.
We're going way late, but I got to ask this. Your colleague Kevin Williams at a National Review had a great piece about a week or two ago. He hung out with some Bernie Sanders supporters and said, look, I feel kind of bad for these people. They're all really scared. Yeah. That's why they accept the socialist rhetoric of Bernie Sanders. Is this schism as simple as those who are scared about our future, who like the fight of Donald Trump, and those who perhaps might be more optimistic about our future and prefer, again, just for example, the uplifting story of Marco Rubio?
Yeah, for whatever reason. And you're right. I think with that Kevin Williamson piece was a great one that made me look at the instincts of Bernie Sanders supporters slightly differently. Look, if you think the government's going to take care of you after healthcare.gov, the Veterans Affairs scandals, and the Office of Personnel Management letting every single personnel record get hacked by the Chinese, you're an absolute fool. It's not like government has this unblemished track record of doing a great job and not letting people slip through cracks and stuff like that. I think that's one of the advantages of self-sufficiency is you're not counting on some bureaucrat approving something somewhere. And so, on the one hand, I guess that's the difference, right? And just kind of backtracking to Trump for a second, I think people think he'll be like The Apprentice when something ridiculous like the Veterans Administration scandal occurs. The one that Hillary said wasn't earlier this week.
Right.
He'll come in and he'll say, hey, whose fault is it? You figure out who the fault is, and he'll say, you're fired, like on The Apprentice. If it was that simple, man, give me President Trump. But unfortunately, it's not.
I know we kept you way late, Jim. I'm sorry about that. But,
no problem. That's right.
Jim Geraghty at National Review, at Jim Geraghty on Twitter. Pick up the new book, Heavy Lifting, Grow Up, Get a Job, Start a Family, and Other Manly Advice. Amazon.com and everywhere. Subscribe to The Morning Jolt via nationalreview.com as well. Jim, best of luck with the book. Love to talk again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Jim.
Take care.